Have you ever had that really unsettling feeling, maybe driving home from work or looking back over a failed project, where you just realize you were running into the exact same wall you hit last year?
Oh, yeah. That feeling of deja vu, but not in a good way.
Exactly. Maybe it's in your career, where you consistently seem to mess things up right before a big promotion. Or maybe it's in your relationships, where every partner, even if they seem totally different at first, somehow ends up triggering the same core emotional dynamic as the last one. It
Hmm.
feels less like just random bad luck and, I don't know, more like you're trapped in some kind of personalized recurring psychological script, like you're reading lines you didn't write.
It really can feel chaotic, almost senseless to the person going through it. But, what we know from decades of behavioral science and psychological research is that human life is actually far less random or senseless than we often imagine. That debilitating feeling of being stuck, it's usually a pretty reliable sign that you are operating within a perfectly systematic, predictable psychological loop. Our brains are fundamentally hardwired for efficiency, for repetition, for seeking consistency.
Which sounds like a good thing mostly.
It is for survival. That wiring is incredibly useful for, making quick decisions, navigating the world without constantly reevaluating everything. But it also creates these really rigid patterns that can be incredibly hard to break if you don't understand the actual mechanics behind them.
Okay, so that's our mission for this deep dive then. We're going beyond just identifying these patterns, right? We want to dig into these psychological forces, everything from the non-conscious wiring of our habits to the complex social dynamics we unconsciously co-create with others, and even the physical imprints left by past trauma.
All the things that create these rigid, often really destructive loops in our behavior.
Exactly. We're going to investigate the specific mechanisms that keep us locked in, and, maybe most importantly, we're hoping to extract some clear, actionable strategies you can actually use to rewrite the code, to step out of the script.
Yeah, and I think it helps to frame the discussion around maybe three interlocking dimensions. First, we really need to understand the internal loops, think habits and bias. This is the non-conscious engine programming the self, running in the background.
Okay, the internal stuff.
Second, we need to examine the relational loops, things like attachment patterns and conflict cycles. This is about how we predictably co-create our social and emotional environments with other people. It's a dance.
Right, the interpersonal dynamics.
And finally, we look at rewriting the code. This is about transformation and integration, the deep, actionable steps, both psychological and, importantly, physiological, that are required to achieve, well, a real metamorphosis, a genuine change.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting with that internal engine. The smallest loops, maybe, but the ones we run constantly, every single day. Habits. They seem so simple, almost trivial sometimes, but mastering them, or at least understanding them, feels crucial.
Absolutely crucial, because having our, let's say, functional habits dialed in frees up immense mental energy. If your brain didn't automate most of your morning routine, you'd be exhausted before you even left the house.
Right, I wouldn't have the bandwidth to, actually think about the important stuff for the day.
Precisely. It frees up the mind to focus on new challenges, solve the next set of problems. It's the brain's ultimate efficiency mechanism. And the science of behavior breaks habit formation down into these four incredibly simple sequential steps that eventually run on autopilot.
Okay, what are they?
It's the cue, the craving, the response, and the reward. Cue, craving, response, reward. This sequence runs hundreds, maybe even thousands of times a day, making our environment feel predictable and manageable.
Cue, craving, response, reward. Okay. And what gives this process its power, its stickiness, is that if any single step is, insufficient or broken, the whole thing falls apart. The behavior just won't become a habit.
Exactly. If you eliminate the cue, like your example earlier, putting running shoes in the basement instead of by the bed, the chain reaction often never even starts. If you reduce the craving, maybe by addressing the underlying need, like getting enough sleep so you're not desperate for that afternoon sugar rush.
The motivation just fizzles out.
Right. If the response itself is too difficult, too complex, requires too much effort, you simply won't do it consistently. And crucially, if the reward fails to actually satisfy that underlying desire, if it doesn't scratch the itch, the brain won't flag it as something worth repeating in the future. It won't get automated.
So that precise understanding of the loop, those four steps,
Yeah.
that's basically our blueprint for deliberately changing things, for breaking bad habits.
It is. We just invert those 4 laws.
Yeah.
You take the science of forming habits and you flip it on its head to break them.
Okay, let's walk through that inversion. The strategies seem really practical, often about restructuring your actual environment. First, to break a habit, you have to make it invisible.
Make it invisible. Reduce exposure. Remove the cues for the bad habits from your environment. The classic example is, getting the junk food off the kitchen counter and into an opaque container on a high shelf, or even out of the house entirely.
Out of sight, out of mind, literally.
Pretty much. If the cue isn't there smacking you in the face, the immediate craving often gets short-circuited before your conscious mind even fully registers it.
Okay, step 1, hide the cues. What's next? This one sounds harder. You have to make it unattractive.
Yeah, this demands more than just moving stuff around. It requires a real mindset shift, some deep introspection.
Yeah.
You have to reframe the habit, actively highlighting the long-term painful consequences of doing the bad behavior, rather than focusing on the momentary, immediate pleasure you think you're giving up.
So instead of thinking, oh, I'll miss that cigarette break, think, this is contributing to lung disease and taking years off my life.
Exactly. You have to actively link the bad habit to a painful outcome or an identity you don't want. Make it fundamentally unattractive to your future self, the person you're trying to become.
Okay, so make it invisible, make it unattractive. Then you make it difficult.
Increase the friction. Add steps between you and the bad habit. If you waste time doom scrolling on your phone before bed, don't just put it on the nightstand. Put the charger downstairs, maybe in a locked box, or give the phone to your partner.
Add hurdles. Make it a pain to do the wrong thing.
Make it a pain, yeah. And this is where the sources introduce a really fascinating tool, the commitment device.
Ah, I've heard of these. Explain that.
A commitment device is, well, it's brilliant because it uses your present self's strength and resolve to constrain your future, potentially weaker, self. You make a choice now that locks you into better behavior later.
How does that work in practice?
Say you really want to hit the gym 3 times a week. You could set up an agreement, maybe using an app or a pact with a friend, where if you miss your workouts for the week, you automatically have to donate, say, $100 to a political cause you absolutely despise.
Oh, painful.
Extremely painful. So when that alarm goes off at 6 a.m. and you're tempted to roll over, the immediate visceral pain of funding something you hate becomes a much stronger motivator than the temporary desire to stay in bed. You're locking in your good intentions against future temptation. You've made the failure incredibly difficult and unpleasant.
Wow, okay. That transforms the psychological cost of slipping up into a real, tangible, and highly undesirable consequence.
Precisely. And finally, even when you're focused on breaking a bad habit, you still need to leverage that 4th law in reverse, or rather apply its positive side. Make progress satisfying. You need to reward the avoidance of the bad habit.
How do you do that? Like, give yourself a treat for not smoking.
You could, but something even simpler and often more effective is habit tracking. Just making a visual record. Each day, you successfully avoid the bad habit, putting that big X on the calendar, watching a streak build. That simple act provides immediate, concrete pleasure.
It's like a mini reward. Proof you're doing it.
Exactly. It rewards your persistence, provides clear evidence that you're moving in the right direction, and that reinforces the new positive loop you're trying to build. It makes not doing the bad thing feel good.
Okay, so that covers the micro loops of action, the habits. But what happens when it's not just an action, but our underlying beliefs that are the source of the problem? That brings on something, well, a lot more complex and often way more stubborn. Cognitive dissonance.
Ah, yes, Leon Festinger's classic work. The core idea, which has held up incredibly well, is that we humans have this deep, fundamental drive for internal consistency. We need our beliefs, our opinions, and our behaviors to align. We crave harmony inside.
When they don't align,
Yeah.
when there's a clash.
That's dissonance. And it creates this profound psychological discomfort, this tension. We are powerfully motivated, almost desperately sometimes, to reduce that discomfort and get back to a state of consonance, of internal alignment.
Give us an example.
Well, the classic one is the smoker who knows smoking is bad for them. The knowledge, smoking causes cancer, I should quit, clashes directly with the behavior, I'm lighting up a cigarette. That clash creates mental tension, dissonance.
And the mind just can't tolerate that tension for long.
Yeah.
So how do we typically try to reduce it?
We usually deploy a few standard tricks. We might rationalize the behavior. My grandfather smoked 2 packs a day and lived till he was 95. Or we might actively avoid information that increases the dissonance, like quickly skipping past anti-smoking ads or health warnings on the pack.
Or, I guess the healthiest option is you actually change the behavior, you quit smoking, or you change the belief. Though that's harder if the evidence is strong.
Exactly. Change the behavior, change the belief, or add new beliefs to outweigh the dissonant ones. But what's really fascinating, and often quite counterintuitive, is how external pressure influences this internal balancing act, particularly when it comes to forced compliance.
What do you mean by forced compliance?
Like, if someone makes you do something or say something that goes against your private beliefs, let's say you're pressured into advocating for a viewpoint you actually disagree with,
Okay.
that forced compliance can actually lead you to change your private opinion to match your public behavior. But, and this is the crucial part, only if the external pressure or the reward for complying is relatively mild or moderate.
Wait, hang on. That feels backwards.
Oh, yeah.
Shouldn't a massive reward or really strong pressure cause the biggest shift in my internal beliefs? If you paid me $1 million to stand up and say the sky is green, I'd probably do it.
Right?
Wouldn't that make me start to wonder if it is green?
You'd absolutely say the sky is green for $1 million. But here's the cognitive loophole. When the reward or the punishment is huge, $1 million, or maybe the threat of being fired, it leads to compliance with very little internal dissonance.
Why little dissonance? I just lied.
Because the action is immediately and completely justified by the massive external incentive. Your brain says, I said the sky was green because I got $1 million. The justification is clear, powerful, and external. You don't need to change your internal belief, the sky is blue, because the external reward fully explains your behavior. Your internal consistency isn't really threatened.
Okay. The money explains the lie, so my belief doesn't have to change.
Exactly. But now imagine the reward is tiny. Say someone offers you just $5 to tell the same lie, to argue that the sky is green.
$5. I mean, maybe I'd do it, maybe not, but it feels cheap.
Right. The external justification is now insufficient. Your brain looks at this meager incentive and goes, wait, I just compromised my integrity. I stated something untrue for $5. That's pathetic. That doesn't adequately explain why I did that. This creates high dissonance.
Okay, high dissonance because the external reason is weak. So what happens then?
To reduce that uncomfortable high dissonance, the brain needs to find an internal justification. Since the external reason, $5 is weak, the easiest way to restore harmony is to adjust the internal belief itself. The brain starts to whisper, maybe the sky does look a little greenish today. Maybe it wasn't such a big lie after all.
Wow. So the smaller the external justification, the greater the need for internal justification, which means I'm more likely to actually shift my belief to match the action.
Precisely. It's a powerful self-justification loop. We change our beliefs to make sense of our past actions, especially when those actions lack strong external reasons. And this keeps us locked into beliefs, sometimes long after they've stopped serving us, just to maintain that feeling of internal consistency.
And this internal comfort seeking, this drive for consistency, it doesn't just happen inside our own heads, does it? It spills out into our social lives.
Oh, absolutely. The sources are really clear on this. Our social groups become a critical resource for managing and reducing cognitive dissonance.
How so?
We actively seek out confirmation for our beliefs from other people. If my deeply held internal beliefs are challenged by some inconvenient facts or experiences, what's the quickest way to restore that feeling of consonance, of being right?
Find other people who agree with me. Surround myself with them.
Exactly. You find your tribe. You seek out others who share your views. This adds consonant cognitive elements. Look, all these smart people agree with me. And it shores up your belief. It provides collective validation.
And this guides who we talk to, what we talk about.
Absolutely. It guides the topics we discuss in social interactions, the news sources we consume, the relationships we prioritize. We naturally gravitate towards information and people that confirm our existing worldview because it feels better. It reduces dissonance.
So we systematically reinforce our own intellectual echo chambers, locking ourselves into these predictable patterns of thought, and often actively avoiding or dismissing anything or anyone that threatens that comfortable loop.
That's the mechanism. And it's incredibly powerful for maintaining stability, but it can also be a major barrier to growth, learning, and changing course when we really need to.
Okay, so shifting now from the individual brain wrestling with itself to what happens when two brains interact, this is where these loops seem to get incredibly sticky, maybe even more destructive, especially in our closest relationships.
They really do. Because now you have two sets of internal programming, two sets of needs and fears constantly influencing each other.
And the source material is pretty clear. A fundamental starting point for so much relational conflict is simply that people vary.
Oh.
They vary hugely in their basic underlying need for intimacy and closeness versus independence and space.
That's a core finding in attachment theory. These foundational differences in what makes us feel safe and connected in relationships are often the seed for nearly all those predictable relational conflicts we see.
So when those attachment needs get activated, which happens, whenever there's stress or distance or some kind of perceived threat in the relationship.
That's when the patterns really kick in. People with insecure attachment styles, broadly categorized as anxious or avoidant, often resort to what the researchers call protest behavior.
Protest behavior. What does that look like?
It can be anything from, acting out aggressively, becoming really critical or demanding, to withdrawing sullenly, making threats, trying to make the partner jealous. It's basically any indirect, often dramatic or manipulative strategy to try and get attachment needs met because they can't or don't know how to communicate those needs directly and vulnerably.
It's like a coded signal for, I need you closer, or I'm scared you're leaving.
Exactly. Contrast that with securely attached partners who generally feel comfortable expressing their needs and expectations clearly. They can say, hey, I'm feeling a bit disconnected. Can we spend some quality time together tonight? They respond effectively without needing to resort to these loops of drama and protest.
Okay, let's really hone in on the most classic, maybe the most painful, and certainly one of the most predictable loops. The avoidant-anxious dynamic.
Ah, the dance. Yes. It's textbook. You have the anxiously attached partner whose core fear is often abandonment. They need frequent reassurance, closeness, connection to feel secure.
So they pursue connection, right? Text a lot, want to talk about the relationship constantly, worry when they don't hear back quickly.
Right. But this neediness, this pursuit of proximity, directly triggers the core fear of the avoidantly attached partner, whose primary value is often independence, self-sufficiency, and avoiding feeling engulfed or controlled.
So the anxious person's neediness feels threatening to the avoidant person's sense of freedom.
Precisely. Which prompts an immediate, often reflexive withdrawal from the avoidant partner. They might pull back, become emotionally distant, shut down communication, focus on work or hobbies, anything to create space.
And that withdrawal, of course, is the worst possible thing for the anxious partner. It feels like confirmation of their deepest fear abandonment.
Exactly. Which creates renewed dissatisfaction, ramps up their anxiety, and triggers even more desperate pursuit. More texts, more calls, more demands for reassurance.
Which then triggers more withdrawal from the avoidant partner.
And round they go. It's this exhausting, cyclical dance of pain fueled by opposing needs and fears where each person's coping mechanism directly triggers the other's insecurity.
It's so predictable when you lay it out like that, but here's something really insightful. From the sources, it's not just about the avoidant person wanting space. There's an internal psychological payoff for them in this dynamic.
Yes, this is subtle but crucial. Avoidants often manage their own self-esteem, their sense of competence and independence, partly by contrasting themselves with their partner. The research suggests they often inflate their own self-worth and sense of self-sufficiency precisely to the extent that their partner seems needy, insecure, or incapable.
Wow. So they need the partner to be the needy one so they can feel like the strong, independent one.
In many cases, yes. Their positive self-view is sort of anchored by the perceived dependence or emotionality of the person closest to them. If their anxious partner suddenly became incredibly secure, independent, and required very little reassurance,
the avoidant person might actually feel destabilized, less sure of their own role.
It's quite possible. Their internal equilibrium relies on that contrast. This helps explain why you rarely see two strongly avoidant people forming a lasting intimate relationship. There's no emotional counterbalancing. There's no dependent shadow against which they can cast their bright light of self-sufficiency.
Good grief. It's this perfectly interlocking, mutually reinforcing pattern where both people unconsciously stabilize their own internal sense of self by ensuring the other person stays locked in their predictable, complementary, and ultimately limiting role.
It's a powerful relational cage, and this kind of dynamic inevitably leads us into conflict, which is really where these relational loops become most visible and destructive.
Right. And there's that huge misconception out there that, happy couples don't fight.
Total myth. The research, particularly from folks like John Gottman, shows very clearly all couples fight. Even the happiest ones disagree, get frustrated, hurt each other's feelings. The true, profound difference lies in how they navigate those disagreements and, crucially, how they repair the connection afterward.
So conflict isn't inherently bad. It can actually be an opportunity.
Absolutely. When handled constructively with mutual respect, genuine listening, and taking responsibility, conflict can actually serve as a powerful catalyst for getting closer, deepening understanding, and strengthening the bond. But that requires avoiding the typical destructive patterns.
And the most classic, most reliable conflict escalator, the one that absolutely slams the door shut on productive disagreement, is defensiveness.
Oh, defensiveness, the ultimate blame game. It's essentially saying, the problem isn't me, it's you. It's an immediate deflection, a refusal to take any ownership for your part in the issue.
Like cross-complaining, right? Oh, maybe I forgot to take out the trash, but you never empty the dishwasher.
Exactly. Or making excuses, playing the victim, righteous indignation, any tactic that avoids looking at your own contribution. And the research shows this systematically escalates conflict because the attacking or complaining spouse rarely backs down or feels heard when they're met with defensiveness. It just leads to stalemate, resentment, and often deep, chronic marital distress.
And this defensiveness, it gets fueled by this negative lens that develops, right?
Yeah.
Once the loop gets really entrenched, everything the partner does is interpreted through that negative filter.
Precisely. It's called negative sentiment override. In a happy, stable relationship, if a partner makes a mistake, say, they forget an errand it's seen as a temporary lapse, maybe caused by stress, forgivable, oh, they're just overwhelmed today.
But in a distressed relationship, caught in that negative loop,
That exact same mistake, forgetting the errand, is immediately interpreted as confirmation of the partner's negative character. See, they're always inconsiderate, they're fundamentally selfish, they just don't care about me. The negative lens takes any neutral or even positive action and twists it to fit the negative narrative, constantly reinforcing the loop of blame and unhappiness.
so how do you break out of that? What's the path to repairing
Yeah.
these entrenched, predictable loops of conflict?
It boils down to one word, really. Ownership. Radical ownership. The healthy language of repair, the language that actually breaks the script, sounds something like this. Okay, I see my pattern here. When X happens, I tend to react by doing Y. That's my defensiveness kicking in. Here's my boundary around this issue, and here's what I can offer as a repair for the hurt I caused.
That's vulnerable
Yeah.
and hard. It's not about winning the argument anymore.
It's not about winning, it's about understanding and reconnecting. It's the language of honesty, of taking responsibility for your part and moving forward together rather than protecting the self individually.
So practically speaking, how do you shift your communication? The sources talk about replacing those accusatory you statements.
Yes, you always, you never, you make me feel. Those are guaranteed fight starters. The shift is towards clear, internally focused communication tools. The classic I notice, I feel, I need framework is incredibly helpful.
Walk us through that. I notice, I feel, I need.
Okay, so instead of launching in with, you're late all the time and you clearly don't respect my time, which is pure accusation.
Guaranteed defensiveness in response.
Guaranteed. Instead, you pause, you regulate yourself, and you say something like, hey, I noticed you came home about an hour after you said you would. That's just a neutral observation of behavior.
Okay, factual.
Then, I feel anxious and a bit disregarded when plans change significantly without warning. You own the feeling it's your feeling, not something your partner made you feel.
Right. My feeling connected to the observation.
And finally, I need us to have a quick way to update each other, maybe just a text. If things are running more than, say, 20 minutes late, could we try that? You make a clear, specific, actionable request with a time frame or a proposed solution.
So it shifts the whole focus from blaming the partner's character to defining your own internal experience, linking it to a specific behavior, and then collaborating on a concrete solution.
Exactly. It takes the heat out, invites collaboration, and focuses on future change rather than past grievances. It breaks the predictable attack-defend cycle.
And this idea of reciprocal influence, how our actions shape the responses we get, it isn't just limited to our intimate relationships, right? It basically shapes our entire social reality.
Absolutely. We are constantly co-creating the environment we inhabit through our own behavior. Think about it. Hostile actions generally provoke aggressive or defensive counterresponses. Cordial, respectful actions seldom do.
So individuals, through their own consistent actions, their general politeness or their chronic negativity, their willingness to cooperate or their tendency to compete, they systematically create a predictable social climate around themselves. They elicit the responses they expect.
Precisely. You teach people how to treat you by how you consistently behave and react. You create either a generally amicable or a generally hostile social world for yourself, loop by loop, interaction by interaction.
This connects to a really interesting concept from the psychologist Alfred Adler, mentioned in the sources, this distinction between communal logic and private logic.
Yes, Adler talked about the logic of man's communal life. This is the objective, shared understanding of reality that strives for general validity. Think language, mathematics, basic ethics, the understanding that cooperation benefits the group. It's common sense geared towards collective well-being.
Okay, the logic that helps society function.
Right. He contrasted that with the destructive potential of private logic or private intelligence. This is a self-centered, distorted way of reasoning that makes sense only within the individual's unique, often flawed worldview and goals, but deviates fundamentally from common sense and the general welfare.
The sources gave that really stark, extreme example of the criminal's private logic. I saw a man who had nice trousers and I hadn't, so I had to kill him, which sounds completely insane by communal logic.
By communal logic, it's monstrous and illogical. But Adler's point was, if you accept the criminal's premise that their desire, I want those trousers, is the single most important thing in the universe, overriding all other considerations like another person's life or societal rules, then the conclusion, I had to kill him to get them, becomes, in a terrifying way, intelligent within that private, distorted framework.
Okay, so private logic isn't just for extreme criminals. It's more common, maybe in less dramatic ways.
Oh, much more common. We see it all the time. Think about the colleague whose private logic dictates. My personal career advancement is the only goal that truly matters.
Right.
Their reasoning might follow. Therefore, the normal rules of teamwork, sharing credit, supporting others don't really apply to me if they hinder my ascent. If someone else gets praised, that diminishes my share, so I must subtly undermine them or take credit for their work. Collaboration is fine only if it directly benefits me.
If you accept their underlying premise that their individual success is paramount, then their actions, like hoarding information or avoiding shared responsibility, seem logical or intelligent from their skewed perspective.
Exactly. It's a self-contained, often self-serving, and ultimately destructive loop based on a faulty core premise. Adler suggested these mistaken movements, these patterns driven by private logic, often stem from a deep, sometimes unconscious, striving to overcome a persistent feeling of being in a minus situation, a core feeling of inferiority or inadequacy.
So the private logic, the self-serving script, offers a kind of temporary, maybe illusory fix, a promise of enhanced importance.
Yes, often by implicitly or explicitly condemning others to insignificance, or by prioritizing individual gain over the common good. It makes the person feel superior or important in their own private world, even if their actions are objectively harmful or counterproductive in the shared communal reality.
And breaking that script, escaping that private logic loop.
According to Adler, it requires nothing less than a fundamental realignment. Recognizing the mistaken premise, seeing how it deviates from shared reality, and consciously choosing to realign personal goals with the absolute logic of human communal life. It means moving from a self-centered striving for superiority to a focus on contribution, cooperation, and social interest. Moving from how do I win to how do we all thrive.
Okay, so identifying all these loops, the sneaky habits, the dissonant beliefs holding us back, the toxic relational dances we get stuck in, that self-serving private logic, that's a huge first step. But step two, actually initiating the change, that often means pushing against some serious psychological inertia, right? Because we've often built our whole sense of self around these familiar patterns, even the painful ones.
Absolutely. There's a comfort in the familiar, even if it's uncomfortable, you know? So the journey towards change really has to start with a kind of radical acceptance of where you are right now. Acknowledging that, hey, we're all a complex mix. We have parts of us that are open to growth and parts that are really stuck in fixed mindsets. And accepting that this is going to be a journey, a process, not just flipping a switch overnight.
And a big part of that inertia, that feeling of why bother trying to change, it won't work anyway, seems to be linked to pessimism.
Yes, the research on explanatory styles is really relevant here. Our sources discuss how pessimism, specifically how we explain setbacks to ourselves, strongly promotes feelings of depression and, crucially, inaction when we face challenges.
So pessimists don't just feel worse, they actually fail more often.
They tend to, yes. Not necessarily because they're less capable, but because they give up more easily. Their explanatory style turns a temporary setback into a perceived permanent catastrophe. So, Failing a test isn't just, I didn't study enough for this test, which is specific, temporary, and controllable. It becomes, I am fundamentally unintelligent and incapable of learning this subject, which feels permanent, pervasive, and uncontrollable.
And if you believe that, why would you persist? You
Yeah,
just confirm your own negative prediction. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
precisely. Pessimism breeds inaction, which guarantees failure, which reinforces the pessimism. Another tight loop. So, to truly rewrite a deep personal script, especially one tied to identity and long-standing patterns of suffering, the sources suggest we need something more profound than just behavioral tweaks or positive thinking. They introduce this concept of metanoia.
Metanoia. That sounds significant. What does it mean?
It's often translated from Greek as repentance, but it really means something deeper. A fundamental transformation of mind, a complete change of outlook, almost a spiritual metamorphosis. It's not just adjusting behavior, it's changing the very lens through which you see yourself and the world.
So it goes beyond just, I'll try harder next time.
Much deeper, metanoia points to arguably the most stubborn barrier to profound change: the ego's deep resistance to admitting fundamental fault. That inability or unwillingness to sincerely look at your core patterns and say, wow, I was wrong, my way wasn't working, I contributed to this pain, I am sorry, I truly need to change.
That's incredibly hard. It feels like admitting defeat or that your whole identity was flawed.
It is incredibly hard, and that resistance, that refusal to admit I was wrong, is described in some psychological literature as being tantamount to the death of hope. It creates a deep alienation from truth, from meaning, from connection. Because if you cannot admit that your primary coping mechanism, maybe even the identity you built around being right or strong or independent, is actually flawed and causing suffering.
And you're effectively locking yourself into that suffering. You can't change what you refuse to acknowledge needs changing.
Exactly. It's why this level of change often feels like a crisis, sometimes even a spiritual one. It requires letting go of an old self, an old way of being. That's why the term metamorphosis, a fundamental change in form, is so apt.
Wow. Okay, so this profound inner shift, this metanoia, it needs support, right? It can't just happen in a vacuum.
Mhm.
And this brings us to integrating the mind and the body, especially when dealing with the echoes of past trauma. This is where the loops often feel physically imprinted.
Yes. The body keeps the score, as they say. Our sources really emphasize that many persistent psychological symptoms, especially those related to trauma and chronic stress, are fundamentally incomplete physiological responses that got stuck, suspended in a state of fear or high alert.
Incomplete physiological responses. What does that mean?
Think about the natural survival sequence when faced with a real threat. Your body instantly floods with survival energy adrenaline, cortisol preparing you to either run like hell, flight, or fight for your life. Fight. Your muscles tense, your heart pounds, you might brace for impact, or maybe you freeze entirely, hoping the threat passes.
The classic fight, flight, or freeze response.
Right. Now, if that massive surge of survival energy is used for active defense, you successfully run away, you fight off the attacker, the physiological cycle completes itself. The energy is discharged through action. But what if you couldn't run? What if you couldn't fight back? What if you froze and the threat eventually passed, but that internal state of high alert never fully resolved?
The energy gets trapped.
In a sense, yes. The maladaptive defensive response, the bracing, the tension, the hypervigilance, never fully completes itself. Instead of discharging, that residual survival energy gets locked into the body's implicit or procedural memory. This is the non-verbal, unconscious script of how your body learned to survive that threat. And it can keep signaling danger, keep running that defensive pattern long after the actual threat is gone.
And that's the physiological loop that underlies things like chronic anxiety, jumpiness, maybe even some physical pain patterns.
It's a major contributor, yes. The body is still physically trying to complete a survival response from the past. So the key to renegotiating these deep body-based loops isn't just talking about the trauma, it's accessing and helping to gently complete that stuck procedural memory.
How do you do that? The sources mentioned something called the felt sense.
The felt sense, a term often associated with Eugene Gendlin's work, refers to that subtle, inner, often nonverbal awareness of your body's ongoing physical sensations. It's not about labeling emotions like I feel anxious, but tuning into the physical nuance of that anxiety, the specific quality of tightness in your chest, maybe a fluttering in your stomach, a shift in temperature in your hands, a slight vibration somewhere.
So it's about paying attention to the raw physical data below the story or the label.
Exactly. Instead of analyzing the narrative of why you feel this way, The goal is to slow way down, bring gentle, curious attention to the physical sensations themselves without judging them or immediately trying to fix them or make them go away.
Just noticing.
Just noticing, with curiosity and acceptance. What happens often is that by simply allowing these subtle sensations to be felt, to be witnessed without resistance, the body's own innate wisdom can allow that stuck survival pattern to gently complete itself. It's not about forcing anything. It's about creating the conditions for a natural, often very subtle, energetic discharge or release. A tiny completion of that old defensive posture.
And this gentle completion, this discharge, can be just as effective physiologically as if you had actually run or fought back during the original event.
The research in somatic therapies suggests yes. It allows the nervous system to finally stand down from that state of high alert related to that specific pattern. But and this is crucial, we need a strong warning here.
Okay.
Many traditional therapeutic approaches sometimes miss this vital distinction between explicit memory, the story, the narrative of what happened, and implicit procedural memory, the body's felt sense, the survival script. Simply talking about the traumatic event over and over, reliving the explicit narrative.
It actually make things worse.
It can sometimes re-traumatize the person or reinforce the trauma vortex. Dredging up the old story and the intense emotions associated with it can just reactivate the nervous system's alarm state without providing the pathway for completion.
So the goal isn't necessarily catharsis, like having a huge emotional explosion about the past.
Generally, no. While expressing emotion is important, the primary goal in this kind of work is the gentle transformation of the implicit body-based memory, the unfinished survival script, often without needing to dredge up all the painful details of the explicit narrative again and again. It's a much slower, gentler, more physiological recalibration.
Okay, that makes sense. But doing this kind of deep body-centered work, especially when things like shame or self-blame are huge barriers from past experiences, that requires a lot of safety and support. What provides the psychological scaffolding for that?
Self-compassion, it really is the foundation.
Self-compassion. We hear that term a lot now. What does it actually mean in this context?
Well, the research, especially from Kristen Neff and others, is incredibly clear and compelling. Practicing self-compassion, treating yourself with the same kindness, care, and understanding you would offer a good friend who is suffering, has profound physiological effects. It actively deactivates the body's innate threat defense system, the fight-flight-freeze response.
And calms the alarm bells.
Exactly. And simultaneously, it activates the mammalian care system, the system associated with bonding, soothing, and feelings of safety and security. We can actually measure this. When people engage in self-compassion practices, we see significant drops in cortisol, the stress hormone, and increases in heart rate variability, a marker of emotional resilience and nervous system regulation.
So it literally creates a physiological state of safety within your own body,
Right.
making it possible to approach difficult internal material without being overwhelmed.
Precisely. It provides the necessary emotional balance and safety net to start addressing the shame, the self-criticism, the feelings of unworthiness that so often interfere with lasting change. And this is important too, self-compassion isn't just about being soft and gentle with yourself.
Oh, what else is involved?
The sources emphasize that true, effective self-compassion requires balancing two essential, seemingly opposite energies, the tender side and the fierce side.
Tender and fierce self-compassion. Go break that down.
The tender side is what we usually think of. Being soothing, comforting, kind to ourselves, acknowledging our shared human vulnerability, accepting our imperfections and mistakes. Okay, I messed up. That's painful, and it's part of being human. How can I be kind to myself right now? This directly addresses the shame and self-criticism.
That's the acceptance part.
Yes, but you also need the fierce side. This is the energy of self-protection, of advocating for yourself. It involves setting clear boundaries with others and yourself, saying no when necessary, fighting for your rights, motivating yourself to make difficult changes, and asserting your autonomy. It's about protecting yourself and taking action aligned with your values.
So it's not just passively accepting things, it's also actively standing up for yourself and your well-being.
Exactly. You need both. You need the tenderness to acknowledge the pain and imperfection without judgment, and you need the fierceness to hold yourself accountable to the new, healthier script you're trying to write, and to protect that new self from falling back into old patterns or harmful situations.
That fierceness gives you the internal strength to say no to those predictable loops that used to define you, or to leave a situation that keeps triggering them.
Precisely. And think about the implications, for instance, for someone stuck in that anxious avoidant loop we discussed. Tender self-compassion allows them to soothe their own attachment anxieties, to feel loved and safe internally, reducing the desperate need for external validation.
They become their own secure base.
And fierce self-compassion gives them the strength to assert their needs clearly, set boundaries around disrespectful behavior, or even end a relationship that consistently leaves them feeling unseen or anxious. They learn to draw on both internal resources to finally end the loop of codependence or attachment insecurity. You become your own source of regulation, both soft and strong. Hashtag conclusion.
Wow. Okay, so we've really covered a lot of ground today. We've journeyed through the tiny micro decisions of habit formation, navigated the sticky loops of cognitive bias and how we justify our actions, explored the intense, predictable dances of relationship conflict.
The attachment dynamics, the defensiveness.
Right. And finally, we've delved into the deep, often physical programming of past trauma and how incomplete survival responses keep us locked in physiological loops.
It really paints a picture, doesn't it?
It really does. And I think the core insight, the thread connecting all of this, is that so much of our lives, especially the parts where we feel stuck or unhappy, are governed by these interlocking, highly systematic, and therefore surprisingly predictable loops.
Yeah, our internal habits and biases lock us into certain ways of thinking and acting, which we then unconsciously co-create and reinforce through these equally predictable relational defense mechanisms with others, all potentially underpinned by unresolved physiological states from the past. It's all connected.
So the path to freedom, the way to actually rewrite the script, isn't about finding like one single magic bullet solution.
No, definitely not. It seems to be about conscious, intentional intervention at multiple points in the system, often simultaneously. It's about intentionally building satisfying, healthy habits while making the unhealthy ones invisible, unattractive, and difficult. It's about cultivating the courage to use radical ownership and vulnerable communication to disrupt those defensive relational cycles.
And using that powerful dual strategy of fierce and tender self-compassion, alongside developing that inner body awareness, that felt sense, to finally allow those old suspended survival responses to gently complete themselves.
Exactly. It's multi-layered work. And underlying all of this, the ultimate insight that keeps emerging from all these different fields, behavioral science, cognitive psychology, relationship research, is that we humans are far less rational in our moment-to-moment decision-making than classic economic or philosophical theories often assume.
We think we're logical, but mostly we're running automated programs.
Pretty much. But the key takeaway isn't just that we're irrational. It's that our irrational behaviors are not random or senseless. They are systematic and predictable. They follow patterns based on the fundamental wiring of our brains for efficiency, consistency, and threat avoidance. We tend to make the same types of mistakes, fall into the same kinds of loops over and over, because our brain is simply executing the most familiar, energy-efficient script it has available.
Until we consciously decide to write and rehearse a new one.
Right. Now, related to that, there's a final, slightly paradoxical point from the research that feels important to touch on, especially concerning choice and freedom. We value autonomy, the opportunity to choose, very highly. It's essential for well-being.
Of course, freedom of choice feels fundamental.
It is. However, some fascinating research suggests that the sheer number of choices available to us in modern life, while seemingly offering more freedom, can actually be overwhelming and counterproductive to our happiness.
The paradox of choice. Too many options become paralyzing.
Exactly. Having too many options can significantly increase the anticipated regret, the fear of choosing the wrong thing and missing out on something better. And counterintuitively, having more options can actually decrease our subjective satisfaction with the choice we eventually make, even if it's subjectively a good one.
That is profound. So the very process of choosing, the agonizing analysis and the fear of missing out can make us feel worse about what we finally decide on. We haven't gained liberation through endless options. We've gained anxiety.
You've nailed it. Which leads to a really interesting final thought about breaking free from our psychological loops. True freedom might not be about maximizing every single potential option, constantly striving for the absolute best in every tiny decision, because that path often leads straight back to analysis paralysis, regret, and feeling overwhelmed, another kind of loop.
So what's the alternative?
Perhaps the real liberation lies in developing the wisdom to discern which choices, which battles, which predictable patterns truly matter for our core well-being and our deeper goals, and which ones simply don't.
Okay, so the final provocative thought for you, the listener, to maybe mull over is this. Is true freedom from our psychological loops found in maximizing every possible choice? Or is it found in consciously choosing which battles and which predictable patterns to intentionally engage with, and which ones we must, for our own sanity and progress, learn to wisely restrict and simply let go of?
How much precious mental energy are you spending analyzing choices or fighting patterns that ultimately don't contribute to the deeper rewritten script you truly want to live? Maybe the freedom to choose absolutely everything is the surest path back to feeling stuck after all. Choose your loops wisely.